Hello again, Crom. It's Matty Moo here, bringing it to you live and all that shite. I'm going to be doing a personal playtesting video of your map, my local server. I'm going to try and make this a quick one because I tend to go on quite a lot. Just loading the map up in my server. My testing server. Come on, hurry up. Yeah. Put a server on the same computer. Yeah, it still takes ages to connect. Oh yeah, there's some error in console. I'll paste that to you later. Hello? Where's the countdown gone?
Fight to the death!
Right, so, this door here, in Deathrun, most of the time, players don't have any collision to their teammates, so if you have teammates occupying the same space, they'll all try and break through this door at once, and unfortunately when someone's standing inside you and you do a melee swing, you'll actually hit your teammate before you hit anything else. So you should probably make this door wider, at least twice the width. I'm not a fan of these kinds of traps where you go through a door, you pass over a floor and it automatically breaks on you. At least here you kind of gave people some notice, but it's still a bit of a dick move to have this right outside the door, personally. You also have one here as well. I don't remember where yet. Don't do that, it's just rude. Oops. I don't know if you know, we frown upon 50-50 traps, but you already know that. Because we just find them a little bit cheap and unfair. You saw the problems we had in this area here. The platforms seem to disappear too quickly for heavies to jump over them. There doesn't appear to be a problem with heavies making the distance, it's just the platforms themselves are, you know. This push you've got here may not be sufficient against, as you said, the charging Targe people, and it might just be that the trigger push is so small that even latency would not represent a challenge. So you'll probably want to come up with another way of doing that, maybe having on the final jump people drop through a hatch and have a longer trigger push or something, you know? You should clip these, because when you're trying to sneak by them it doesn't help that you can get caught on them, you know? So put a nice clip brush over the front of them. This model appears to be casting shadows on the wall, so you might want to disable shadows on it, stop it from casting black ugly shadows. But this is an alpha, so the detailing comments. The same problem I said about earlier on in the spawn room, you're going to have that here. People could just stand in front of the button and block it from being hit. So what you should do is any button that you got like this is make it also pressed on touch. So I would just go over to it and touch it and it would press it, and that would prevent anybody from blocking the button. Oh shit. Oops. Your packing issue is probably caused by Vide, so hopefully CompilePal should sort that out for you. And tabby dozy. Curious. Alright, so let's go back to the start. The administrator. Please don't be a... Okay, that's fine. I thought it might hurt me. Oh! Alright, yeah. So, as I said earlier on, if you're putting buttons like this on the wall, put a clip brush over them because you can walk into them and get caught on them. If you're running around desperately trying to catch people, then that can be a bit of a frustration. Your activated corridor is nice and wide here, perhaps a little bit too wide. I would perhaps make your speed lane a little bit narrower and then bring it in slightly, possibly move that edge to about here, because it's helpful if you can go from buttons to the speed lane quickly. Another thing is, when you're designing your activated corridor, avoid going around the outside of a corner, because that means the runners have less distance to travel, and you can see they only have to go around the inside there, so I've got to go all the way around here, which means it's very easy for them to run away and rush, and you really want to avoid rushing because it's so annoying for the activator. So try and have interior bends if you can. So what I would probably do is, if possible, move your activated corridor on the inside wall instead. That might be a problem because that's where you built your traps, so I suppose what you could do is move that stuff to this side. You could just pick up the brushwork, flip it round and hammer and then dump it down again, or you could rotate it. There are keyboard shortcuts for flipping brushwork, Control L, Control I think. L horizontal, I vertically. I suppose an alternative would be to... I'm not going to mention it. Teleportation for activated corridors is a sin. But there might be another way to do it as well, which I'll touch on soon. This texture is, I find it kind of visually a little bit uncomfortable to look at, to be honest. Perhaps if it was less finely detailed and it was larger, that would be better. Yeah, I found the distance from the from the partition wall here to the speed lane here to be a bit too short. I was accidentally running onto the speed lane, and I find that frustrating, so I'd push that back a bit. I think in my own map, the distance from here to there is 224 units, but I cannot recall. You may want to extend your speed lane down here as well, but it's not a major issue. Yeah, the speed lane, I would push this back a bit because it's easy to sort of like get caught on it as you go through. Only say 64 units, just to move it away from the corner, the racing line, you know. Whee! Yeah, a bit narrow here as well. And here. I think someone mentioned that it's dark here, but that doesn't really matter. I mean, you don't need to see the ground. Personally, when I do my activated corridors, I like the light from the runner's side coming through into the activator side. It feels a bit more atmospheric, almost as if you're kind of in the background behind the scenes, like in Big Brother or something. So let's go over the traps, shall we? Music's getting on me. I'm getting used to it, whatever. Just in case you haven't done it already, when the motivator reaches the end, automatically trigger a victory condition for the blue team, because if for any reason the red team is able to bypass the motivator, then if the motivator didn't trigger a victory, then they'd be able to stall indefinitely. So having the motivator trigger a victory at the end is a good fallback. Another thing is, if you had, what you could do is have a logic branch at the end and set it to false by default, and then if a red player gets through to the mini games, you could set the logic branch to true, and then when the the motivator reaches the end of its path, it will test the logic branch. If it's false, then it will trigger the victory for blue. If it's true, then it will just do nothing. It's an if statement, basically, a binary flag variable, and then you're just testing that variable. So trap designs, yeah, avoid the use of these kinds of traps here because they're a bit unfair. Okay. Just so you know, instead of using these brushes and painting them hazard textures, you can use overlays to do hazard tape. If you go into our tips and tricks channel on the Discord server, there's a little guide there that shows you how to make hazard tape overlays. And you can also stretch them out a bit as well to make them longer, but also keep their dimensions so they don't look stretched. And you just cap it off with like a left and right hazard tape. But that's the sort of thing you can do during the detailing phase. Presume people get sucked in here. This trap, when people go through there, you already know that they can be healed. If more than one player can go through, then there's a danger that two medics could go through and indefinitely heal themselves. So anytime you have something that saps health away from the player, you should try and add in a guaranteed death with a delay, so you can have a second trigger hurt with like 1,000 damage that triggers after 10 seconds. Or what you could do is you could use the trigger the hurt that you have, and then you could use add output. So when the trigger is triggered, on start touch, self, exclamation mark self, add output, damage, and then you can set it to 1000. So and with a delay of 10 seconds. So 10 seconds after the trigger is touched for the first time, the trigger's damage would be ramped up to 1000, which would effectively be an instant kill. And that 1000 damage should take care of most issues. I've never had an issue with it myself. 10,000 if you want to be sure, but there's no real need to go that high. Cool. There was a problem here where the door, after a while, went over here. I think what happens is when two people are standing on the door and they touch each other, then the door sees that as blocking damage and then it opens again. So in your door's flags, you'll want to go onto the spawn flags and look at force closed. And then you'll probably want to go to the key values, the properties of the door, and put blocking damage as 1. So that's 1 unit of damage per frame. So that ensures that any players standing on top of the door that are touching each other will not be able to block it, and they'll also take a little bit of damage as well. I mean, there are things you can do to have the door close fully without causing damage to the players. For instance, you can turn this into a funk brush and parent it to a funk door, and then make the funk door passable, and then give it the spawn flag not solid to players. But that's probably a little bit too complicated and unnecessary for that. Not entirely sure what's happening here, to be honest. So far, the themes of the traps, when you are inside them or when you're witnessing them, you don't really know what's happening. In other maps, like Office, or R60D's map is actually probably a close another close map to this one. They have little boundaries that spring up, like fences and shit that that kind of tell you the boundaries of the trap, or the fact that the trap is active. You could have some translucent brushes, for instance, or a zone, you know, or maybe just some props or whatever. Not entirely sure what's going on there, but this trap zone here is absolutely huge. This is a very unfair trap zone. Unless, of course, you can sidestep the thing, but I'm not entirely sure that's the case. I don't even know what that is. It's actually quite difficult to see. That's the first time I've seen that block. I only heard the sound in the past. Not sure what relation it has to Doom either. Oh, it's a rocket. Oh, presumably these are the shotguns. What are they called? Chain gun windows as well. Okay, that's pretty cool. A variation on a theme. I like this idea. This is probably my favourite trap in the map. It's more interesting. It provides a variety of choices for the runners. It's not, well, presumably not terribly lethal. I guess gas happens, and then the player's health is slowly drained, which is pretty cool. So they have to kind of get out of it. Now, this is an interesting concept because if one player was trapped inside there, then it would take them longer to press every button, but if more than one player was in there, they'd be able to work together as a team, and you see some of that in Dungeon Beta. There are some traps where you can get out of them, and if there's more than one player, it's actually beneficial to allow yourselves to get trapped in there. Now, the problem you have is on servers with weapons, you know, you have to you can basically just press the buttons by shooting them. And so what you could do there is you could hide the buttons behind obstacles. I had a trap a while ago, which was a puzzle, and it was on the left I had 4 computer stations, on the right I had 4 as well, and each of them had a button, and then a button would go green and it would make a beeping sound, and then the player had to run over to it and hit the button, and then the next one would beep. And then you'd have to run over and hit that button, and they'd be timed, so you'd only have a certain amount of time to press them. And if you didn't press all the buttons before the time ran out, then the floor would open and you'd fall through. But I scrapped it because, well, of reasons I won't go into. So maybe you could have some kind of system where, you know, the button flashes and you have to go and get it. You could also have like surrounds around buttons and shit, so people can't shoot them directly. Also, splash damage is quite interesting. If you look at the way splash damage works on brush faces, whether rocket or a sticky, you could, if you have like a brush face, it's difficult to describe here, but if, let's say this was protruding a bit further, then if I put a sticky on this, then that means anything standing to the left here would not actually get any splash damage, because it would only kind of come out at a 180-degree arc. It wouldn't go behind the obstacle. You could also punish people for pressing the run buttons as well. So if they were just spamming shots and shit, then they could actually cause the gas to come out worse, or they could freeze the buttons. Not quite sure what's going on here, but I received some reports that this trap was kind of sucking people in. I'm not entirely sure if that's true. I like the idea of this one because it seems to give the runners some chance to escape, and I really like traps that have a chance to escape because they don't feel so unfair. See, what happens in a lot of new maps is people tend to kind of focus on the effects of the death rather than the actual mechanics of the trap. So what you'll find is all of the traps for the gameplay-wise are virtually the same. The only gameplay is you jumping in and out of the trap bounds, in and out continuously in an effort to juke the activator. So if the activator triggers the trap whilst you're not in there, fantastic, you've successfully avoided the trap. But if you're in there and they press the button, well, you're screwed, you know, you just can't get out. So you're then kind of forced to witness your own death. Whereas if you have a chance to avoid death by solving a puzzle, or maybe dodging something that's coming at you, or maybe you have a certain amount of time to adapt to changing circumstances, then that's fantastic. It's a balance, though. You know. I didn't know there was a trap here, actually. That's interesting, actually, because I suppose what you could say is it forces you out, but you could run backwards, couldn't you? But you might want to add a sound effect or a light so people realise what's happening. Bear in mind that some people might be deaf, so if you rely on sounds alone, that could be a little bit unfair for them. So always try and couple audio cues with visual cues as well. Cool. Actually, I like that trap, by the way, because it's not about just running through, is it? You've got to kind of jump in, and it's timed well. I think heavies can probably achieve this as well if the timing is right, and I do like timing traps because the onus is on the player to get it right, and they also work to slow the players down as well, so it gives the activator a bit of time to recuperate. It's a very good anti-rushing mechanism, and I'll talk more about that soon. Okay. Yeah, so in a lot of maps where you have this kind of simple flow, this is a bad example because this is not really a simple flow, but here and also here, for the runners, it's virtually an unobstructed corridor, and so there's nothing really to slow them down naturally. There are no static hazards, no obstacles that they must overcome. Everything is controlled by the activator, so if the activator isn't quick enough, then they could easily slip by them. And the problem with runners slipping by is especially when you've got these narrow viewing angles, is it's very difficult to realise when you're missing someone because they've rushed through. So what I advise people to do is say every third trap is to have some form of anti-rushing mechanism or slowing mechanism. So let's say you've got a trap there and a trap there, then this third trap would have some kind of natural or static hazard, which means, say for instance, it could have an electrified fence that people have to crouch under or navigate through. That's a static hazard. It's something that never changes, and if players have to kind of navigate around or overcome. And then you have the manually activated trap elements, which is something which is added into the mix that they must then deal with. So, for instance, you could have an electric fence that people have to dodge and weave through, and then what you could have is you could have something above that comes down, which has holes in. So a sound would be played and a light would come off, would show, or a point spotlight, and then this thing would slowly come down. And then they've got a limited amount of time then to look up at the ceiling and try to get to a safe spot, whilst also still dodging the electrified fences. So what you're doing there is you're forcing the runners to concentrate on something, and then giving them something else to focus on as well. So you're kind of loading them up with things to focus on. That's the approach that I had in Steamworks Extreme, combining trap elements, combining automated elements with static elements, manually activated elements. So you'd always have at least two things to juggle. Sometimes it would be about just giving the player two things to focus on at a time, two timed things, for instance, that were slightly different from one another. Anyway, going off topic. So there you go. This should be everything you need for now. If you're interested in my thoughts on trap design, then I did do a very long video comparing the traps of Wooden and Steamworks Extreme. It's on this channel somewhere, or you can probably find it on the server, the Discord server. It's about 50 minutes long, but it compares an old map, a basic map, with a newer version that's iterated on top of the basic map, and it shows you how I took those basic trap designs and built on them. So, thank you very much for watching. I hope this has been instructive and educational, and I look forward to seeing the next version of your map.